Hello, so welcome to the second part of making 5160 string steel powder. So if you remember in the first video, what we did was take some various metal powders, we put it in a can with some mild steel screws just for a bit of contrast. We forged that into a billet and we extracted that from the can that we made it in and produced a solid billet of steel. What I'm going to do in this video, I'm going to forge a blade. I'm going to finish it up, harden it and temper it, and then I'm going to check the steel. I'm going to have a look at it, spark test it, file test it, and have a look under a microscope, see what the steel looks like. First up, I'm going to forge the blade though. So here we have our billet of steel, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw this in the forge, get this nice and hot, draw it out and make something useful out of it. Mostly just to test that I can actually forge this stuff. It's not just going to fall apart, it's not going to crumble. I just want to make sure that this stuff is actually workable. So the reason why I'm vigorously brushing the steel right now is because I've just noticed a crack and I'm kind of panicking. What I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to brush as much of the scale off that crack as possible, and then I'm going to get my emergency flux. I'm going to throw a little bit of borax powder on there and throw that in the fire, try and get it as hot as I can, get that forge welded. Honestly, it's not a bad test actually. This stuff should be able to forge weld to itself, so I want to be able to test that it can. We've got to look at the positives. What I'm going to do is I'm going to spray a little bit of water on the anvil now, and I'm going to spray the same. I'm going to spray a little bit of water on the surface of my hammer as well. And what this is going to do is when the water hits the steel, the water's going to superheat and explode, and that's going to blow up and get rid of all the scale off there. Getting rid of a bit of the scale off the outside of that. I'm not even sure I could tell where that crack was anymore. That's completely sealed up. I'm happy with that, and I think we can throw that back in the fire and continue on forging it. So, all good. What I'm just going to do now is I'm just going to check the state of this blade before I start drawing things out and removing any thickness from there. But what I'm a little bit concerned about is which end the screws are at, and what I'm worried about is that they're actually on the blade edge. I completely forgot to check which end they were before I started drawing this thing out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cool it down, I'm going to throw it in some acid, I'm going to etch it a tiny little bit, and just enough to be able to see which end those screws are at, because I've got the wrong end, I need to fix it now. And here we go. So here's our cooled down steel, and right on the edge there I think I can see what appears to be a screw. Unfortunately that's on the edge that would be the knife blade, so I'm going to have to flip this thing around. It's not the end of the world, it's a little bit annoying, but it's better to fix it now than realise after I actually etch the thing later on. And there we have it, pretty much. I'm happy with that. That's kind of like a rough shape for the blade. The tip, I'm going to grind a lot of that crud off the end. It's kind of got a gonzo nose on the end of there. I'm going to grind all that stuff off there, so that's fine. But I knew there was a lot of delaminations across the end. The quality of the steel there and the other side as well wasn't particularly great. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to normalize the steel. Remember that this steel a few hours ago was a pile of powder, so it's been put under a considerable amount of stress to be put into this shape right now. So normalizing it is a necessity at this point before it goes into a heat treat. And there we have it, a nice normalized steel blade ready for heat treating. Don't see any particular problems in there, no obvious cracks, so I'm happy with that. I think I'll take that. We'll move on to heat treat. Finishing up, I'm going to heat treat the blade. I'm going to temper it to a nice straw colour, and then I'm going to grind it to 400 grit and have a look at the steel under a microscope. So there we go, into the oil. If oil doesn't get it hard, then I will move on to water and see if I need to use water for the quench, but that looks relatively good in terms of the scale bursting off the outside of it like that and leaving that kind of dull steel colour on the underneath. That colour, as far as I understand it, is a good sign that the thing is hardened. You can even see the contrast between that and one of the screws there, one of the lines of the screws that's near the spine. So I'm happy with that. what I'm going to do, I'm going to run a file over that now. There we go. There's going to be a little bit of decarburizing off the outside, so I expect it to stick on the first stroke, but after that, that kind of runs straight off. I'm happy with that. If you compare that with the unhardened tang, then that's a nice contrast. I'm gonna mark that up as hard steel. So, by the way, I honestly didn't realize how hard I hit that steel with the file. Just for people out there, you shouldn't hit hard brittle steel on hard brittle steel like that. It's not a good thing. Okay, I'm going to temper this now. I'm going to throw it in the forge, trying to get it to a nice golden yellow colour. And as if by magic, all tempered. The edge is a nice golden colour, the spine is a bit bluer. I'm quite happy with that. So I'm going to clean this up on the grinder. I'm going to do a 400 grit and end up with a nice clean knife that I can throw in the acid edge. So I'm not going to show you the whole grinding process, but I thought I'd give a second here just to show those sparks that are coming off here. And those sparks are incredibly vibrant. It's a really good sign for the type of steel that we're trying to go for. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to throw this in the acid. I'm going to check the steel. So here it is, straight out of the ferric chloride that I've thrown it in. It's been in there for 20 minutes, half an hour kind of thing. And you can even see with the acid on the outside of it, those shiny spots on there. That is spots of chromium that haven't fused with the actual steel. So if we zoom in on this, we can see all those little flecks of chromium as they come through here. All these little kind of like star spray pattern in the steel. And you can also see a couple of lines of those steel screws in there as well. So that's the mild steel, and that's the contrast between the two steels. So I'm quite happy with the way this looks as well, because of the manganese in there, it should have darkened all across the steel, and that's a good sign. So I'm going to use this times 1000 magnification microscope. It's an electronic microscope. Buy these online. And here's the steel at roughly times 1000 magnification, and you can see little spots like this spot of chromium in the steel. That looks reasonably clean for me though. As we go through, you can actually see the contrast between the different types of steel. So if we look at this line here, on the top we've actually got the mild steel screw, and at the bottom we've got our high carbon steel, and you can see the difference between the two steels there. The top one has got more of a refined look to it, whereas the bottom one is a little bit more patchy, but that's what we kind of expect. We didn't do any folding of this steel, we didn't try and mix it in any way, we just took a billet and forged it out. So I hope you enjoyed that. What we did was we took a bag of iron powder plus a few other extra ingredients, and we forged it into a hardened and tempered and eventually functional blade. I hope you enjoyed that video and even found it a little bit useful. Thank you for watching.